Hi guys, welcome back to Finding Joy in Your Kitchen. Today I am going to show you how to make and can apple butter. And this can be quite the process, so knowing stuff ahead of time can be very helpful. So I hope that you can use this video to refer back to things if you decide to make apple butter for yourself and your family. So let's get started. The first thing that you want to do is select the type of apple that you want to use. So this has been some trial and error over the years, but what I have found is there are 4 different apples that I like to cook down together, and those types are McIntosh, Cortland, Golden Delicious, and in the past I've used Snow Sweet, which isn't a very common apple. It's a small red apple, but it's hard to find. So in place of that this year, I am actually using Macoons. And the combination of the 4 actually caused it so we wouldn't have to put sugar in the recipe for our applesauce. I use the same apple blend for our applesauce that I use for apple butter. So what you're going to need to do, so you pick how many apples you want. If you select a bushel of apples, you're going to be busy for a day or two trying to make apple butter depending on your schedule. So it really depends on how many apples you have going into your recipe as far as how many pints or half pints that you're going to get. So I started yesterday actually working on this, and the first thing that we're going to do is cut down all the apples and core them. Now, I don't peel them. I do wash them and wipe them down, but I leave the peels on, and there's a couple reasons why. 1, I want to make sure I'm getting as much apple as I can, and 2, there are nutrients in the peel that are good for you. And also, the coloring on the peel will help color your apple butter or your applesauce. So I usually leave the peel on. So all we're doing is, you can do it however you like. I just usually cut them around, put the core in a bowl, and then I toss the core. And then all I'm doing is just chunking them and putting them in the pot. And then after you have as many as you want in the pot, then you can work on cooking them down. But just to get started, this is all you do. And it doesn't matter, you know, what ones you do first or what step you do them in. You're just going to want to make sure that they're mixed amongst each other. That way the apple flavors can mix. So we're just going to continue doing this until we're done with this. This is the last of the apples that I have. And then I'm going to cook down the pot that I have started. So while I'm doing this, I'm just going to give you a little bit of history. I can remember as a kid peeling the apples actually with my mom and dad. The mill that we used is a small food mill that looks like a pot, but it has a like a strainer on the bottom and a crank on the top, and it's not a very big one, so it would take a long time, but we would mill it through that, and I can just remember peeling a lot of apples as a kid. But more importantly, I remember, I don't even know how old I was, but I remember going to my great-grandfather's, and he didn't live near us, so we must have been visiting my grandmother, who lived down the road from him. And we went to go see him, and he was making apple butter. And my great-grandfather used to do it in a unique way that I've never attempted to do. But they would actually cook the apple butter over an open fire outside. And the apple butter would be in a copper pot. And he had this large paddle. Sorry, I'm sure you can hear my dogs in the background. They're chewing on something. Anyways, they would have this large paddle stirring this huge copper pot that's hanging over a campfire. And this was a process they did, you know, for a day at least. But I only got to see that one time, and it was pretty cool just to see my great-grandfather out there stirring this big, huge pot with this paddle. My mom had actually gone and was working at my grandmother's house and cleaning out some stuff, and she actually found that paddle, one of the paddles, recently. So I'm going to show it to you here in a little while. It's just kind of nostalgia, I guess you could say. Something that our family has done over the years. And I don't know who else still makes the apple butter in the family, but my mom definitely did for a long time. And for quite a few years, I did it alongside my mom and dad. We would pretty much pick a day and work on apple butter all day long. And that can be pretty tiresome, but we don't make the apple butter every single year. We would just make one large batch and attempt to do it about every other year. And I actually haven't made apple butter in 4 years. I'm pretty surprised. But I must have made a big enough batch the last time to hold us over. But I only have 3 half pints left, so it's definitely time to make the apple butter. I'd like to gift it. I like to give it to my sisters because I know they don't do it, but it's definitely something that they recall as a child and enjoy it too. So I'm still working on these apples, and we're going to continue doing this until I'm done. So we'll meet you back here in a minute. All right, I am done cutting up the apples, and I just want to give you a little sneak peek of the pot. This is the pot that I have full of the apple chunks, and what I like to do is just put a little bit of liquid down in the bottom of the pot. That way your apples aren't going to stick to your pot. I like to use apple juice. If you don't have that, that's okay. Use water. Just remember that that liquid you will have to boil off that, so it's not part of your apple butter, and make it watery. You really want it to be thick, and that liquid can give it a watery substance. So we're going to go ahead and turn the oven on. Not the oven, the stove. So I have the apples on a medium heat, and I'm not sure if you can hear it. I'm going to try and be quiet for a second. It's starting to boil, that liquid on the bottom of the pot, and you just want it to boil for a couple minutes, and then we're going to give it a stir, and you're going to start to see apples that are starting to cook, and that's good. You just don't want those to stay on the bottom of the pot. Okay, so as you can see, after stirring it, there are bits that are starting to cook down, and right here you can see that the peelings are starting to come off some of the apples. That's also going to show you that the apples are beginning to cook down, but you want them to be soft before you run them through the mill. Otherwise it's going to not give you the consistency that you want for the butter. As you can see, the apples are really starting to cook down. In fact, if you look closely, you can see a little bit of boiling starting to come up through. As they're boiling, don't let them sit too long. You want to keep stirring them so no apples are sticking on the bottom. If you get that char taste in your apple pulp, it just affects the whole recipe. And a lot of times people end up throwing out their apples, and I would hate for that to happen to anybody. But so just make sure you're stirring it regularly and just scooping what's on the bottom and bringing it up to the top. And eventually all the apples will become soft. Now, depending on the type of apple, some will get softer quicker than others, and some might stay a little bit harder, which makes sense because you want that structure in your apple butter or your applesauce. I mean, really what I'm doing right now is the beginning stages of applesauce. If you don't add anything to the apple pulp, once you're done running it through the food mill, that's pretty much applesauce, and you don't have to cook it down or anything. You just can it that way. So just keep stirring it and until we're ready to put it through the food mill. Alright guys, look at that. The apples have really cooked down. There are a few in there left to cook just a little bit more, but it's just about done, and we're going to run it through the food mill next. Okay, this is the food mill that we're using today. We're going to put the apple pulp in here, and then we're going to crank the food mill, and you're gonna see the apple pulp just come out this strainer here. And there's different sizes you can use, but this is the one that we use for applesauce. The peelings and everything are gonna come out this little chute and into the bowl, and the pulp is gonna land right in this container. So we're gonna get started on that and get the rest of these apples milled. We're just wrapping up the last little bit of the apples. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a close-up. So the apple is being pushed through the strainer there, and you're just getting this nice fine pulp. Just resembles an apple sauce. A little bit of thickness to it, which is nice because that just means we won't have to boil it as much. And then coming out the side are the peelings, and you're seeing steam in there because the apples were still warm when we were processing it. Now, if you find that you have a lot of apple coming out with your peelings, go ahead and run those back through the food mill, because you want to try and get as much apple as you can. If you don't want to deal with it, I guess go ahead and throw it out, but it's not going to hurt it to run it back through the mill a second time. All right, so we're done milling the apples, and I have 40 cups put in my big saucepan. Now the recipe that my mom and I came up with is 20 cups for the batch of apple with 2 cups of sugar. And you could use white sugar or brown sugar. Now, because I have 40 cups, I am doubling the recipe, but I have decided to do half brown sugar, half white sugar. The brown sugar really helps with the coloring of the apple butter, and I think it just gives it a little bit of a better flavor, but you don't have to go that route. If you just only want to use white sugar, that's fine. If you only want to use brown sugar, that's okay too. So 20 cups of apple pulp, 2 cups of sugar, 4 teaspoons of cinnamon. So I'm going to just turn the camera. And this is what we've got going so far. Now there is another ingredient I'm going to add, but unfortunately it's a secret. So I will be adding it and mixing it in after. If you wanted a little bit more of a cinnamon infused apple butter, my mom and I have added cinnamon oil before. You can also add a cinnamon stick in there while it's cooking. Just remember to remove it prior to putting it in the jars. All right, I've got all my ingredients mixed in, and now the next step is you want to just let the apple butter simmer, because it needs to get to a thick consistency, more than just applesauce. So many people that have tried this either love it or
There's some others that say it's just a glorified applesauce. You want to make it more than that. So it's got to be thicker than just applesauce. So this takes some time. This is the long part. So what we're going to do next is multitask while this is starting to set. All right, so while that's cooking, we're going to do a couple things. And the one thing you want to do is make sure that your jars are ready. So when the apple butter is done, you can start jarring it and then putting the lids on it and all that. So what we're going to do is I've already taken the jars out of the cases. These are brand new jars. Actually, I gift these so much I ran out of half pints. So half pints is what I stick to. There are some times that I use pints, but I tend to not eat it quick enough, or in the house we don't eat it quick enough, so it tends to go bad. So I've decided just to stick to half pints. And one thing that you can just put it in your dishwasher, and that helps with the sanitizing process and just making sure that they are super clean. Okay, my jars are washed, and this is one tip I could give you that's easiest for me. I like to keep the jars in an oven at 200 degrees, and they should be in here for at least 20 minutes so that they do get warm. So I'm just going to let them sit in there and rest while I continue to cook down the apples. And then on the back of the stove, I have the lids in some simmering water. And this is just going to help them get a good seal on the jar. And I have enough for at least one canner, and then once I use all those, I'll refill the pot. So trying to multitask when you're making apple butter can be a little tricky. You want the apple butter to be up high enough so it's able to thicken, but you don't want it too high, otherwise you might get splatters on your ceiling. And you really have to stir it frequently. You don't want to just walk out of the room with it boiling and have it splatter all over the place. Just trust me on that from experience. You could also put this in your crock pot and let it cook all day, or like a turkey roaster where you'd be able to monitor the heat setting on it. I've done all of those, and sometimes my parents and I would make so much we would have to have all those ready. I think actually recently I found a picture that we used a camp stove in the kitchen with the stove and crock pots because we had so much that we were making that we just didn't have enough space on the stove. So with that, let me tell you, so I had a bushel of apples that I went through, and I have 40 cups of apple puree in my pot, but I also have a little bit more in a container. And I could make a small batch, or I could just can that into applesauce. And I'm guessing there's probably about 8 cups in that other container, but I really didn't want to overflow my pot. So yeah, a whole bushel does probably about close to 50 cups. Let's just say that. And you'll want to know that when you're trying to figure out how many apples do I even buy. And if you're an avid canner, you know taking notes is really important from year to year, because when you haven't done something for a year, it's hard to remember how much you did last year, or even in this case, when we don't do apple butter every year, it's hard to remember what I did 2 years ago, let alone 4 years ago with a recipe. Hey, real quick, I just wanted to tell you that Jason kind of left me on my own today to do my own recording, and I didn't turn the camera right on my last clip, and I have it not landscape, I have it portrait style, so I've already messed up. But I have to say, I have done a little bit of work with the lighting in my kitchen just to make things a little bit easier and not have all these casts of shadows and everything. So I'm gonna just try and show you what I've done just to help. So take a look at that, guys. No, those aren't skirts on my lights. Those are coffee filters, and it's definitely helped with some of the issues I have from time to time when I'm trying to record. I just had to show you that. So one thing I want to tell you is I put the lid on the pot, and you don't want to seal it completely. Just have it, you know, tilted off of your pot just slightly so it does boil. But let me tell you, you want to make sure that you are scraping the bottom of your pan when you stir it. That way you don't get anything burnt to the bottom. And because you've added that sugar in there, it can burn quickly if you're not paying attention to your apple butter. So make sure that you're doing that. I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek at what I'm working on. It's smelling amazing and looking really good. All right, so I am going to share a couple more tips with you about getting the right consistency for your apple butter and some of the tools you should be using. So let's take a look at the sauce. So right now it is very thick. I've turned the heat off so it stops popping. Be careful because I actually burnt my finger tonight getting ready to stir it. So one tip is no matter what pan you use, when you know it's done, your spoon should do this. And number two, see how it's not dripping off when I pull it out of the sauce? That also means it should be done. And I use a wooden spoon because I feel like I can scrape the bottom a lot easier than with a rubber spatula, and it gets all the little bits and pieces off. So that's my other tip. The last thing I wanted to tell you is before you jar it, taste it. Don't just taste it on a piece of on a spoon. I actually like mine on toast. So make yourself a piece of toast, try it. If there's something missing, then that's when you should make some modifications. I actually tried mine and I felt like I couldn't taste the cinnamon as much as normal. So I added 2 more teaspoons of cinnamon, and I think that was the ticket. So next I'm going to show you the jarring process. For this next piece, these are the tools you're going to need. You need a damp washcloth, a measuring cup, a funnel with a wide opening, a plate, and this is just really because I don't want to set the funnel down on my counter, and a pair of tongs, and actually a knife. I haven't gotten that out yet. So those are the tools that you're going to need for this next part. So to get started, I'm just going to take some of the jars out of the oven and get them ready. Now, you can probably hear my fan above the stove is kicked on. And that's just because of all the steam that's coming off of these 2 pots. Okay. And now I'm going to just fill them. And you want to make sure that you leave some headspace in the top. I usually just go to this bottom brim. We're going to go through every jar and fill them. Then once we fill them all, we'll run a knife around the edge just to make sure we get all the air bubbles out. And the damp washcloth is so we can wipe off the edge or the rim of the jar. We want to make sure there's no food particles around the top. Otherwise the lid won't seal. And then once we have them all filled and the lid's on, we can put them in the canner, which I've already gotten the canner ready. And it's just, as you can see, simmering. It should not be at a full boil. If you have it at a full boil, when you put your jars in,
they will pop and break open, and you don't want to do that. All right, so we're putting the knife around the edge on each jar. And this is a step-by-step process, and I try my best to not have any interruptions while I'm doing this. Otherwise, I miss a step. And each step is just as important as the other. Okay, now we're wiping the edge of each rim. And I usually just set them to the side, then I remember that I actually did it. And I don't lose track. And don't get ahead of yourself. Don't do too much at one time. You know, I only have 6 here for a reason. You want to make sure everything's staying hot. See, like I just ran that through that jar on accident. And I'm going to wipe that rim. I wasn't paying attention. Okay, and I'm going to rinse that before I do my next set. Alright, on my back burner, I had my lids going, if you recall that. And just look at the inside. You can see the different color. That just means that they were ready. Now, some people say you don't have to do that. I do like to do it. I don't know, I've always done it that way, and I'll probably always continue. So when you tighten this, tighten it as hard as you can, and then come back just a hair. So they call it a finger tighten. And then as you get them done, you're going to put them in the canner. I'm just putting all the lids on, and then I'll tighten them all at once, and then I can put them all in the canner. If you're a first-time canner, you know, something like this might be too big of a project for you. Start with something easy and small, like maybe pickles or a small batch of jelly. Just till you get the steps down. Alright, we're going to pull out some more jars. I really don't remember how many half pints I can fit in here, so I've got 10, and I'm hoping I can fit them all in. I'm going to check at 9 once we get the 3 filled. Now I'm using a half a cup, and this takes just about a cup, which is why you hear me kind of banging off the cup, because this is thick. So I just want to make sure I'm getting all of it out of the measuring cup. Alright. Run the knife around the inside, getting out your air bubbles. Wiping the rim, and then putting the lids on.
chasing that rim around, or that lid around. All right, we're gonna stick with 9 in the canner. Forgot to get my just lowering it down in the water now. And the water should cover the top of the lids. We're just going to cover the canner and turn up the heat. So the jar's processed for 10 minutes. Did you hear that pop? That's music to a canner's ears. That just means that they're sealing. You're just going to lift them out with a jar lifter. Make sure you turn the heat off. Now, don't think that you can continually go from one to the next. As far as filling the canner again, you need to let the water cool down some before you start the next batch. Having your temperature too hot could risk the chance of breaking jars. So I am wrapping up the apple butter, and I have probably 3 more canners to do, and I didn't think I needed to continue going over that process with you. I think that you probably got it by now. But I did want to share with you this paddle that my mom brought home from her mom's house. And this is what my great-grandfather and grandparents used to use when they had this big copper pot over the campfire, and they would stir the apple butter with it, and the apple butter would just flow through the holes, but they could still scrape the bottom of the pot. And I just think that is so cool. And I know that the recipe that I have is probably nothing like what they used, but it's just something that we've continued to do over the years. One of those family traditions that my great-grandfather used to do, and it's just kind of sentimental, and one of those things that you don't want to let go of. And someday it probably will get too tough for me to do, but until then I'm going to continue to do it and enjoy it while I can. So thank you for joining me on this video today, and I know that I've got some people that haven't seen anything in a while, and some people that have wanted to see the apple butter again, friends from other states, and I hope that this has been something you've just enjoyed watching, and my first little recording that I've done without Jason too. So have a good night and stay safe during this pandemic, and just know that we love you and God loves you, and God bless.